All righty. It is chilly in here. I said we'd warm it up a little bit. We don't know what's wrong. It worked fine last Wednesday when we were here, so I don't know why it's not going, but our wonderful trustees will get it going. If you're still eating, go right ahead. We'll let you do that, and we're going to get started tonight. We're going to talk about, finish talking about the question about human sexuality, homosexuality in particular, as it relates to the church, and so that's what we're going to do tonight. All right. Before we do that, let's have prayer for our food and our time together. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the night. We give you thanks that we can come to our church together. We can share a meal and fellowship and laugh and talk about things that have happened in our lives and think about people who are not with us and share concerns with one another and share a meal with one another. And we know that Jesus was recognized in the breaking of bread on the road to Emmaus. So may he be recognized among us tonight. We give you thanks for the food that we've shared, and we pray that you will bless our time of study together. In Jesus' name, amen. All righty. The discipline. The discipline has the following language. It is in paragraph 304 of the discipline, point 3, and it says this, having to do with what we as Christians and how we as Christians are supposed to live. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Therefore, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. And then it goes on to talk about ceremonies that celebrate marriage unions between homosexual persons can't be done in our churches or by our clergy. And in 2019, during the Special Charge Conference, another section was added to what's called the judicial content of the discipline. That's at paragraph 2702. One of the chargeable offenses that was added for clergy is for doing those ceremonies in the church. Now, the basic paragraph that I just read about the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching has been in the discipline for somewhere around 50 years. It was put in sometime in the 1970s, and I'm not sure exactly when, I can't remember, but in the 1970s, and it's been one of those provisions of the discipline that people have been fighting about ever since. And ever since that time, the two groups that you have on each end of the spectrum, the most conservative members want to either strengthen it or at least leave it like it is, and those who are on the left end of the church want it removed. And so that's been the debate, and it's simply become more heated over the last few years. And it's not that it's new, because the fight's been going on, and there have been several general conferences over the years where it's assumed more importance than other times, but in recent years, probably since, I don't know, about 2012, it's like the thing has been amped up some. At General Conference, there have been demonstrations that have stopped the order of business and whatnot, and trying to get the language to change. There's legislation brought on from both sides at every General Conference, as I said, either to strengthen or to do away with that provision. That's what it says in the discipline. And there's not actually a whole lot that is in the discipline about that. But now let's think about what the section means. Because in our church, in the sections that come before that particular paragraph, it talks about how in the United Methodist Church we regard all persons as people of sacred worth. All persons are created in the image of God. All persons sin and fall short of the glory of God. All persons are in the same boat. Some of us, we're not better than others. We're not less sinful than others. We're all sinful, and we're all in need of grace. And therefore, the church is there for us. The church is there for people who are hurt, who are injured, who are crippled, who are sinful, crippled spiritually. It is to be open to all who want to hear the grace of God. We do not differentiate between sinners. One sinner is not worse, not better than the other. We're all in the same boat. And the difference between us and those who are among the folks and practices that the discipline prohibits, the only difference between us and someone else is that we may have experienced God's grace. We may have been forgiven. It amazes me sometimes that the way that sometimes Christians talk about people who are unrepentant, as if they are the worst of the worst and the baddest of the bad. Pick your sin, whatever it is. A serial murderer is a worse sinner than somebody else. No, he's not. An adulterer is a worse sinner than somebody else. No, he's not. Someone who practices homosexuality is a worse sinner. No, they're not. Not in God's eyes. In our eyes, maybe so, but we categorize things. Sin is rebellion for God, pure and simple. It doesn't matter what form it takes. It doesn't matter how it manifests itself. Sin is direct rebellion against God, and the only remedy for that is grace, forgiveness. And if there is any difference between us and any other sinner, it is that we have that grace. So the stuff about some people are worse than others just doesn't fly biblically or otherwise. So we as a denomination have been open to all people because we regard all people as creations of God. Some have been redeemed, some have not. So that's our starting point. But then there is that list of things that we as Christians, or at least in our denomination, have regarded as incompatible with Christian teaching. What does that mean, incompatible with Christian teaching? It means that when God created the world with a certain order to it. And everything is supposed to work like it should, but sin interrupted that. And it no longer works like it used to, like it did originally in God's design. And one of the things that God is doing with his work is redeeming all of creation and us a part of it. And so the goal is that when God finishes his work, it will be like a return to Eden. That's where we're going. And God is bringing us along, those of us who are his people by faith, is bringing us along to that new place. The Bible talks about it as a place where there is no more mourning or crying, no more suffering, no more pain, no more illness, no more sin. But we're not there yet. And those of us who live by grace, we live with one foot in two worlds. We live in this world, and we live in the world of the kingdom. And so we're all sinners, period. We all need grace. And so everyone is valuable to God, and whoever is willing to hear the gospel and receive it is given that grace. Whenever it is that they reach that age where they decide to claim that faith for themselves, say, this is my faith, I believe, they are part of God's kingdom. Now, the problem is that even though we become redeemed, we are still sinful. One of the things that we teach as United Methodists is that we are to, when we begin that new journey with God at the new birth, we are to start our road toward sanctification or perfection. And we're at different places along that road, as is everybody else. We are moving toward that. But when you first do it, until you grow in God's grace, there's not going to be a whole lot of difference between what you were before and what you were after. It's just that simple. Now, I've known of people who have been drug addicts or severe alcoholics who have accepted that grace and immediately stopped. But most people, we don't, it's not that much of a radical change. So people will still sin. You and I will still sin. You get backed in a corner, 99.9% of you, if you get backed in the right corner, you're going to lie to get out of it. You will. If you get caught doing something you're not supposed to do, 99% of us would lie rather than accept the consequences. So none of us is perfect. One sin is not worse than the other sin. And as United Methodists, we believe that all people should be welcome in the church to hear God's grace. But there are things that we regard as less than what God wants for us if we're trying to be made whole, and the practice of homosexuality is one of those. It's important to differentiate between the practice of it and what modern folks talk about orientation. Some people are homosexual by orientation. That is, they are attracted to people of the same sex. If they never act on that, they've never committed that sin. If they do act on it, then it is less than what God wants. That is our theological teaching. And what we say is that in the church, one of the things the discipline says in this area is that we expect fidelity in marriage and celibacy in singleness.
What was the second one?
Celibacy in singleness. So that someone who is, whether they're heterosexual or homosexual or whatever the case might be, by attraction, if they never act on it, then they haven't done anything wrong. On the other hand, if someone is single and they act on it, whether it's with a same-sex partner or a different opposite-sex partner, the sin is still there. You see, one would be perhaps infidelity, and the other would be homosexuality. The sin is still there. We don't condone either of them, sexual sin. And I think most people understand that. And I don't think most people are so carried away by the debate itself, because we have different opinions on that along a spectrum, along a line. I think what's bothered most people in the last few years is that we have the discipline and it's not enforced. That's the feeling people have. That's what I hear. We hear out in the Western jurisdiction that they've ordained a couple of gay bishops. They're routinely ordaining persons who are gay, practicing gays, to the ministry, and they're in open revolt to the discipline. And nothing is being done. Is that what y'all kind of think? Nothing's being done about it? The issue is, there's not much we can do. Not the way the discipline is written. Well, there's a penalty, but it has to be enforced, and they're not enforcing it against themselves. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay? There's a history here. And that history is what got us to where we are in the discipline. Long ago, we're going to have to talk about some history. Long ago, General Conference elected bishops, and bishops were accountable to General Conference alone. Now, for those of you who don't know, General Conference is the official body of the denomination that meets every 4 years. Every annual conference elects delegates, both clergy and lay, and those delegates go to wherever General Conference is being held, and the number can't exceed 1,000. There's proportional representation between clergy and lay, so there's half lay, half clergy. And since we are a worldwide denomination now, those delegates come from all over. In recent years, the number has been growing and will continue to grow, and there will be more even at the upcoming General Conference. It's that Africa has outpaced the United States in growth of the church. I've said, and you've heard me say, I'm sure, many times, that the African wing of the denomination has grown from roughly 300,000 to around 6 million in the last 25 years. So, it's like a wildfire over there. And by and large, in fact, I think probably 100%, they want to maintain the traditional discipline as we've had it. So, you know, that's come to a head. We've got more, or have had more of the people who want to keep it the same voting every time the thing has come for a vote every 4 years at General Conference. What's different about this time is that we had that special General Conference in 2019 that was supposed to settle these issues, and it didn't. The language of the discipline was strengthened, but it didn't solve any problems. And so, you know, we've had some people leave since then, and that's the situation we're in right now. Under the 19 discipline, churches were given the option if they would pay 2 years' worth of apportionments and their assigned proportional share of unfunded pension liability, they could leave. That would have put us at about $275,000 to $300,000. Other churches have done it. By and large, most of the churches that have left are the small rural churches, where it doesn't cost as much. So, last time I looked, wasn't that long ago, out of around 42,000 congregations, 4,000 have left under the provisions of that discipline. That's worldwide, 4,000. So we're not talking about a huge number of members. So what's going to happen at the next General Conference? Well, nobody can predict what General Conference is going to do, but I don't anticipate anything much changing at the next General Conference. We're going to have basically the same delegate structure that we've had for the last few years, and so if anything changes, it won't be anything radical. You know, if there's enough votes, they might pull that section of the discipline out, but not replace it with anything, because I don't think they'll have the votes. But getting back to where we are, how we got here, we got to go back in our history. And so we're going to go back to late 1700s, early 1800s. John Wesley never intended to start a new church. His was a revival movement of the Anglican Church. And it was growing in America, and then all of a sudden the Revolutionary War happened. We were in revolt and at war with Britain for our independence. And one thing John Wesley was smart enough to know is that the Anglican Church was the official church of England, of Britain, of the crown, and the king or queen, whoever was in it, was the head of the church, the sovereign head of the church. So that wouldn't fly in the United States where we were fighting a war of independence, so he cut his movement loose and ordained Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury to be the bishops of the new church. Coke went back to England pretty quickly, but Asbury, as you probably know, traveled all over the southeastern United States in particular, and single-handedly began what became the United Methodist Church. And the original discipline of the church, if you owned slaves, you could not become a member. You couldn't. It was forbidden. Problem is, of course, as America developed, what happened in the South was that slavery became a rather large institution. And so churches started getting a little lax on that part of the discipline and said, well, okay, you can come on in, but we don't approve of you having slaves. Okay, we don't like that, but we're going to let you come on in and be a member. And so the church grew, but grew both in the South and in the North. And long before the Civil War happened, it came to a head in the Methodist Church, the Methodist Episcopal Church. That was in 1844. Bishop Andrew from Georgia inherited slaves from his wife. He didn't buy any outright, but he inherited them from his wife. And it turns out that in Georgia, it was illegal to sell or give away your slaves, even if you had inherited them. So if he had done so, there could have been a criminal legal penalty for doing it. And he probably didn't want to anyway. But that came to a head when charges were brought against Bishop Andrew for owning slaves. And the debate started, and in 1844, this is 17 years before the Civil War started, the church split into northern and southern branches. Okay? There was the Methodist Episcopal Church North and the Methodist Episcopal Church South. In fact, the North didn't use North. They just called themselves the Methodist Episcopal Church. You go around towns these days, small, rural towns or country towns, county seats, you can still see some of that. You can look at, the United Methodist churches that are there, and it might be on top, or it might be in a cornerstone, when the church was built, and it'll say Methodist Episcopal Church South or Methodist Episcopal Church. Because Tennessee was one of those where you found both. It's still, there's still evidence of it. This one was built long after that, but I know the last one I served, Cornerstone, said Methodist Episcopal Church South. 1914 when that sanctuary was built. So for nearly 100 years, the northern and southern branches operated independently. Two different denominations. Talks came here and there over the years about merger, but nothing ever came of it. Along the way, other little branches split off from one or the other. You ended up with the Free Methodist Church. You ended up with Southern Methodist Church and several other denominations for different reasons. But you still had the two large bodies, the North and the South churches, Methodist Episcopal Church. They operated basically the same. There wasn't really any difference between them theologically. They maintained the same historic doctrines that Wesley put forth for the new church when he let it go, the 25 Articles of Faith. Both of them affirmed the Apostles' Creed just as we do today as the basic doctrinal structure of our church. There was very little difference. The disciplines were basically the same. The structure was basically the same. And finally, in 1939, the churches came back together and merged. But it wasn't the same after. Because what happened in 1939 is in the talks for bringing the church back together, the southern delegation, what is today the southeastern jurisdiction, that's us, Kentucky, Virginia, and on south, over to the river. Arkansas is not part of it, but southeastern United States. The Episcopal and lay delegation brought legislation that they insisted on having if there was going to be a merger of the two parties, the northern and southern branch. And what that was a deal that was made, sort of in the back rooms, that we would have what's called Central Conference. There would be the Southeast jurisdiction, the Northeast jurisdiction, and all of that. We would still have General Conference. General Conference would still be the legislative body of the church and the only one that could officially speak for the church. That didn't change. What changed was how bishops were elected and to whom they were accountable. Because the southern jurisdiction insisted on starting what was called a Central Conference. The Central Conference would hold all Methodist churches in the world that are not in the United States and all black churches, all African American churches. That was what they did to bring the church back together. As part of that compromise, to merge the two churches together, in the discipline, bishops were to be elected by jurisdictions, no longer the General Conference. Okay? General Conference would no longer elect them, and bishops would no longer be accountable to General Conference. They would be accountable to the jurisdiction where they served and from which they were elected. And if one bishop wanted to move from one jurisdiction to another, there was a whole set of rules that had to be followed in order to let that happen. The deal was that would ensure that there would not be a black bishop in the South. That was the deal. Central Conference would take care of the black churches, and the white churches in the South would never have to worry about having a black bishop. To me, that kind of sounds like you sold your soul to the devil. And I believe the biblical passage, you reap what you sow. Don't you? The church is reaping what it sows. And we don't know how it's going to turn out. If it's conceived in sin, it's going to stay that way. And it was. So, from 1939 on, even in the merger of 1968 that brought in the Evangelical Brethren, the structure stayed the same. Jurisdictional conferences, as far as Episcopal matters are concerned, are autonomous. Okay? So, while there are disciplinary things they have to do, and they do them, and even though it says in the discipline you can't elect practicing homosexuals to clergy or to Episcopal office or anything like that, folks in the Western jurisdiction figured out a few years ago they could, because there's no accountability. They can elect who they want to. They can do what they want to do. And even though there have been numerous judicial council decisions, that is our Supreme Court, that have come down saying you can't do that, there is no provision in the discipline to enforce against them what is the law of the church. One reason for that is because we are closely divided on many of those issues as a whole church, but particularly in the election of delegates to General Conference. It is a great big ship with a tiny little rudder, and it takes a very, very long time to turn. Okay? That's the reality. Could it ever change? Yes, it could, but not in a matter of a few years. Here is the way things are right now. The Judicial Council has ruled and upheld what the discipline says, that no United Methodist funds can be used to support any of a numerous causes like abortion, homosexuality, or anything like that. It can't go. And they ruled that the general pension fund or general fund for bishops can't be used to pay bishops who are practicing gays who have been elected. That's no problem to them. They'll pay them themselves. So, while the general church's dollars aren't going there, the jurisdiction is paying their bishops as they want to pay them. And there's no legislation that will allow us or no law in the church that would allow us to enforce the discipline against another jurisdiction. Now, why did that happen? Because nobody anticipated these problems. Who would have thought of this? Nobody anticipated these issues coming up. They just didn't. Certainly not in 1939 or 1968. And there again, as far as I'm concerned, part of that, some of the reaping what we sowed. We made a deal with the devil, and whenever you make a deal with the devil, you get burned. That's the reality. And so the church is suffering from that even today. Now, can things change? Yes, they can. Will they change? In order to make what are known as sort of like constitutional changes, it's not simple majority. They structured it in a way that I believe they should have structured it, that for making big changes in the church, you needed more people, you needed more votes, like 3/4, and if you're going to make a constitutional change, you've got to pass a threshold at General Conference, and then it has to go to each annual conference, and a certain number of them have to vote for it. It takes a long time. And the problem is right now, in delegates at General Conference, there's not enough of either side to force big changes to happen because of the split in what people believe. So that's where we are. In the church, you've got a reflection of what you have in larger society. There is a split on what people think about issues surrounding homosexuality. That's the reality. Will things firm up one way or the other? Probably eventually, but if you're in a transition time, you don't know, and that's where we are in the church. There is simply no way that the Southeast jurisdiction can force the Western jurisdiction to do anything. Even the judicial council can't force it because there's no teeth there. The bishops are accountable only to their jurisdiction. If they hadn't changed it where bishops were elected by jurisdiction, we would have dealt with this issue one way or the other a long, long time ago. But we don't have the power. There is no way to do it. So that's the quandary we're in. And the debate's not going to go away in the next few years. It's not going to stop. And it's not just going to happen in the United Methodist Church. It's happening in every denomination. And every denomination is going to try and have to figure out how to deal with it according to their own laws. But I can guarantee you in any of them, it's not going to be something that happens quickly because, like I said a moment ago, a big ship is very, very hard to turn around. And it takes a long time to do it. Will it settle out? Yeah, it will. Eventually, one way or the other, it'll settle out in the church, but not now. I mean, we've been fighting this battle for 50 years, and the church is going to continue. Some of that came to a head with recent years with special general conference that took place in 2019, but it's not going away anytime soon. I don't anticipate the basic law of the church changing. I don't anticipate that there were enough exits to really affect things much one way or the other. That's the reality. Questions, comments? Yep. There's no plan. In those jurisdictions that allow that, I suppose they would deal with that in some way, or they would have to leave the church, or whatever the case might be. And there is no legislation to do that right now. There's nothing you can do about it until the church gets enough votes to go one way or the other. We're going to have both sides continuing to fight like we have for the last 50 years. So.
Is the African contingent not big enough to force their will?
They're big enough to get things done, but they're not big enough yet to have a supermajority. That'd probably take another 20 years if the church in some way holds together between now and then. I'm not sure that it will, but if it some way holds together between now and then, there will be more delegates coming from Africa to General Conference than anywhere else, because they'll be by far the biggest if they continue to grow like they are.
Put them together with the Southeast.
Yeah, you can get a supermajority, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to be at this General Conference or the next or whatever. But eventually it will if they continue to grow like they have over the last 20 years. Yeah, and we continue to decline like we have over the last 20 years.
Do you anticipate them changing the discipline in 24?
Not really. I don't. I don't think the votes are going to be there. And as I said, if anything changes, it certainly won't be legislative change that is opposite this. If anything, the church could possibly, if there are enough delegates, they could vote to just simply do away with 304, paragraph 304, point 3. No, that was the second one. Practicing homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, therefore, about practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates and so forth. If anything, they could withdraw that, but that wouldn't change things in the jurisdictions because, the western jurisdiction is doing what it's doing, and the southeastern jurisdiction is going to do what it's going to do.
Where is Illinois? What are they in?
I think that's great. That may be the north central. I don't know. I'd have to look at the map. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, it's Great Rivers Conference, yeah. But I think the jurisdiction they're in is north central.
Is the western jurisdiction the only one that's
They're the only one doing it routinely. There are a few other annual conferences, not really jurisdictions, but a few other annual conferences that have sort of allowed it with clergy, but there's always been a big fight about it. Charges have to be dealt with. So I'm like, okay, if a just a regular ordained minister, if they were brought up on charges for being a practicing homosexuality, what would happen is that it would go to the bishop would review the case, then he would send it on and basically certify it for trial, church trial, with charges pending. So the clergy then would be brought before a jury, basically, of clergy from the annual conference. Retired bishop generally will be the judge of it. And you just basically have a trial. It's pretty much like a civil trial. And then it goes to the jury, and the jury convicts, then they decide what to do, whether, to punish them by taking away credentials or something less. So there are a number of chargeable offenses in the discipline, and that's one of them. So, that's what would happen. But that would be individual cases. It wouldn't be anything, each case is different. What's supposed to happen with a bishop is that the bishop, if charges are brought, then it would go to basically the chair, the president of the college of bishops, which is the number of bishops, in a jurisdiction. So then if charges are brought, then he has to bring a jury together, basically, of bishops from that jurisdiction and have a trial. Well, if everybody that's out there is agreeing to what you do, you're never going to have a trial. So they just basically ignore what the discipline says and go and do what they want to do. And one jurisdiction can't affect what another jurisdiction does with regard to the episcopal offices, so there's no legislation to enforce. You simply can't do it. Now, some things can be, done, like when the Judicial Council ruled that no, the general funds of the church can't be used in the Western jurisdiction to support this. They can enforce that, but they can't go into they can scream all day long, no, you can't do this. Shame on y'all, you shouldn't have done it. They can do that, and they can hold all they want to, and they're just ignored. Think about what would happen in the United States if we did that. If say somebody said, okay, well, I don't care what the Supreme Court says. I'm going to do what I want to do. The structure of law wouldn't last very long. You may not like the laws, but the only thing that's kept this country going for so many years is that people have a basic respect for the law. We are a country of law, not of men. It's been put. So, what would you do if a president ever got there and said, I'm not going to follow the law. I don't care what the Supreme Court says. I'm going to do what I want to do. What would you do about it? What would the Supreme Court do? Absolutely nothing. They wouldn't have the power to do it. It is only respect for the law. I mean, I've said to groups, think about it. The most powerful man in the world, voluntarily surrenders power every 4 years. It's an amazing thing. What would happen if one ever decided not to surrender that power? What would the Supreme Court do? It could rule until it was blue in the face. You would plunge the country definitely into civil war, because you would have those who are loyal to a particular person, and the army probably would split, and you could plunge this country into a self-destructive war very, very quickly. That unfortunately could happen, but it is respect for the law that keeps it from happening. Only respect for the law. And same thing in the church. If you don't respect the law of the church, and you disregard it, then you cause chaos. And that's what's happened in our church. Unfortunately, just like the United States, we don't have any way of going into the Western jurisdiction and saying, you got to do this.
I understand that part, but how do there's no teeth to that, but how can then they can come along and tell
But they can't do that. I mean, you know, unless you're willing to leave. No, it's not. Nobody's been forced to leave.
Well,
No.
I bet to them, I don't know why it's not, but we're splitting these churches.
Hmm?
It's the name that we're concerned about.
Yeah,
The United Methodist.
yeah,
If we don't agree with what,
yeah. Oh, you're talking about local churches that have split?
yeah,
Yeah, they have. I mean, because it's a reflection of what's in society, and it's a reflection of what you have just about everywhere you go these days. People disagree on it. And if you come to a church, like several have done in our conference, if you force a vote right now, you're going to split it. Every single one of them is split right down the middle. Every single one of them. Under the legislation of the church that you had until the end of the year, you had to have a two-thirds percent vote asked to leave the church. Two-thirds had to vote for leaving the church. Even if there was just one person, less than two-thirds, the vote, you don't get to do it. And then once that's done, if you make that vote, then, you know, you've got to come up with the money that you're going to have to get out. And so what's happening in churches like Milan is you've got a reflection of what you have everywhere you go today. You got people who don't agree on the issue. And so when it came time to vote, in those cases, even though a majority voted to leave, two-thirds didn't, and so you had it split right down the middle.
Tim, I think that's really not what I'm thinking about is if the controversy is we take this out of the discipline, right?
Mhm.
You have to, you're voting on taking that out or leaving it in.
Mhm.
So is not the controversy that we take it out and we become the United Methodist Church. But if you don't agree with that.
Now, if you take it out, you wouldn't be United Methodist Church anymore. What was left,
I thought that's what it was, that they were taking the name.
well, I mean, yeah, they are. I mean, if a church votes to leave the denomination at this point, then, yeah, they won't take the United Methodist name with them.
No, but I meant, it seems to me like that the people who want to change things are saying, we're going to change it, but we're going to be the United Methodist Church.
Well, no, I mean, nothing like that's happened yet. I mean, but yeah, I mean, when time comes, I'm sure there will be a fight. But under the temporary provisions that the discipline gave in 2019, it was basically what was called a gracious exit plan, so that if a congregation voted and had the money to pay in order to get out from under the denomination, they would be able to take their church free and clear and go and do their own thing. Now, the anticipation was, I'm assuming, because I think it was a bad structure to do, set up to split churches wide open. You know, in an ideal world, everybody would be on the same page in the congregation, but they're not. And so, you know, in the smaller churches, that more so, but in larger churches, county seat type churches, that they're not all of the same mind, and so the vote is split right down the middle.
So you can't be a United Methodist, in theory, you can't be a United Methodist
If you leave,
with the discipline that we have. And we are the United Methodists with that, with those words in the discipline.
yeah, but you wouldn't be able to call yourself that anymore if you left under the provisions.
I'm not leaving,
Yeah.
I'm talking about just hijacking the discipline and saying we're gonna change the discipline.
I think there was a proposal brought up after the last conference or around some, but it never passed.
Yeah, I mean, who would end up with the name United Methodist? They would, if there's a true denominational split, like a general conference, like there was in 1844 or something, then one of the groups will emerge probably with the name United Methodist. Who that would be, I don't know. I don't know.
You know, I was sitting here thinking, I had a long conversation not long ago with my friend Bishop Joe Pennell.
Mm-hmm.
And he reminded me that we thought when we left the Central Conference, it would be the end of the United Methodist Church. When we joined with the Evangelical
Mhm.
Brethren,
Yeah,
when we let women so many other things we need to be more concerned about.
I agree with that.
Because this is such a small percentage. And he said if a church called and wanted a gay pastor, he said there couldn't give them enough. They're not enough.
Yeah.
He said we couldn't find.
Oh, yeah, no, that is true. It's very
And
small. Yeah.
we're worried about something that we shouldn't be, I mean, it's a concern, but it's not our biggest
Yeah.
concern.
No, I agree 100% with that. I think it's, I think it's
There's so many
sidetracked.
other things we
Yeah.
need to be
I think the issue to a large degree is hijacked the work of the church, and, you know, unfortunately, I mean, we do live in a culture where people disagree on this issue. I mean, sometimes, you know, I've heard people say it's a liberal thing. It's not a liberal or conservative issue, folks. I mean, if one of the most conservative politicians we've ever had serve in this country, Dick Cheney, has a daughter who is a lesbian, and he is a full and complete supporter of all things gay rights. It's not a liberal versus conservative issue. And it's everywhere you go, and you know, it's in the church, we deal with it. I don't know what the ultimate answer is going to be. But I don't believe God's through with us yet either. Mhm.
I have a question, okay. This is a concern, so we've been talking about the jurisdiction, like that's their jurisdiction, they have their rules and things. And so my concern is this drag queen pastor or seminary student up north, right, in that conference. Okay, so I know that this drag queen seminary is an associate pastor at that church. He in Florida visiting the church, the United Methodist churches invite him, and there's YouTube guys of this drag queen breaking the bread and helping with the wine during the Eucharist, okay? And that's in Florida, and is that our jurisdiction? I mean.
It is our jurisdiction, but I mean,
Is there any discipline for?
well, there's nothing in the discipline about transsexuality, because there again, it's not something that was ever anticipated.
We were talking about
but-
what we read and what we sow. and
Well,
it's
but
starting to
yeah,
affect our
well, it could be that, but I mean, the thing is, if it's another United Methodist, I mean, local churches and pastors do have some autonomy. I mean, we're not automatons of the bishop and all of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, under the discipline, I could invite anybody I wanted to here to speak. You don't got to come listen to them, but I could, as long as, you know, I can't engage a non-United Methodist evangelist, but I can bring another United Methodist in here to say, you know, absolutely. Bishop can't do anything about that. So, you know, even if the bishop wanted to, he couldn't do anything about it. Because if we don't have that autonomy, then who's going to be the pastor of the church? It's going to be the bishop, or it's going to be me. And I have had conflicts with bishops over things before. And basically told them, you don't have a say in it. What you know, here, as long as I'm within the confines of the discipline. So, you know.
Just curious, how did it happen that this drag queen was accepted into the seminary anyway? Even, I mean, he even has, like, poetry that he does as his regular.
Well, most likely,
That says that God is nothing.
most likely that is a matter that came out after seminary, after candidacy. That's where it usually happens. So, you know, once somebody is ordained, you know, there's only a limited number of ways that you can take their credentials away, and as it should be, because otherwise, you know, if a pastor could have his credentials taken away by the bishop willy-nilly, then, you know, you'd have some bishop probably who would just, you know, anybody they don't like. So there are structures in place to protect. And again, we're talking about something that's emerged in the last few years. Who would have thought in 1968 we're going to have to contend with this? They didn't. There again, the church is a very large ship. And it takes a long time to turn. Can it turn? Yes, it can, but it doesn't happen quickly. And, you know, we're not the only denomination doing this. I mean, others have split. The Anglican Church or the Episcopal Church is effectively split in the United States. And unfortunately, they do a lot of their stuff out in court. And if it comes to that, I hope we can avoid doing that. But you know, it is what it is. We're fighting a battle. We're fighting for the soul of the church. It's what I consider myself to be doing, and that's what I'm going to continue to do for now.
In one of our biggest problems as Methodists is there's a misconception about where we are. The public, a lot of times thinks that it's a really big issue when really it's relegated to just a very small percentage of Methodist churches.
Oh, yeah.
Want
Yeah.
this-
Yeah.
Want to change the discipline.
Yeah.
They're so
Yeah.
outspoken.
Yeah.
But that's what the news picks up on, and then people say, well, you're a Methodist, we all want to.
Well, you know, I think to some degree, but I also think there's a grading of where people are on both sides of the issue. That you know, they're those who you know who feel differently about it than I do can be from folks who just you know mildly disagree to people who radically disagree. And who, you know, where you are on that spectrum is going to depend on how you try to talk things out. So I'd say it's you know, we've been fighting over this for 40 years. I think everybody wish it would go away. But I don't see it's going to go away anytime soon, and we're going to continue to fight. Eventually, you know, the church will work things out. And I think that's the way it's always happened in the church. I think part of that's God's plan, it takes some time for truth to emerge. And if you look back on the history of the church, the issue of who Jesus is, or what he is, took roughly 300 years to get ironed out into what we would call the Orthodox faith today, that Jesus is both human and divine. There were a lot of debates about that. There were wars about that. There were excommunications about that. But eventually, and through the coming together of the church, that emerged. And there have been other things too, and sometimes it just takes a while. And all of us would like to see it resolved one way or the other. Jenny?
Yes, but your point is, I'll just say an example. Our church wanted to pull out something, and we didn't have the money. What's to stop us from doing that anyway?
Nothing. The church can pull out anytime it wants to. I mean, you can vote tomorrow to pull out, and there's not a thing in the world anybody can do about it, but you're not going to take this property with you. That's the difference.
Now, but if we have money and we put it, and we voted to leave, then this is ours.
Yeah, if you get 66%. But, I mean, you're not going to have time to do that between now and the end of the year anyway. So, you know, I think most people, myself included, well, you can't predict what General Conference is going to do. Most of us do think, I believe, that if something really comes to a head at General Conference, that gracious and cooler heads will eventually prevail, and those churches that cannot by conscience stay in one way or the other will be allowed to go. I don't think anybody wants to force somebody to stay in. So I think that the legislation that we had about the payment of the proportional amount of pensions and 2 years of apportionments, that was just a stopgap measure. That was more or less put in for folks that felt like something had to be done. And I pray that cooler heads will prevail on whichever end it is that decide that they ultimately have to go. So, I mean, it's not over yet. I mean, there will be legislation of some sort, I think, and so you can't predict. I can't predict. But what I do know is God's faithful, and so I'm not worried about this church or if we can figure out a way to live together whichever way. I think it's what God wants us to do, because while we're part of a denomination, we're primarily a part of this place. This is your family, and You know, people that feel strongly about it, I understand that. And I said, you know, right when this issue first came up, if you remember, we met a few times talking about it. I said, either way you go, you're going to lose people. Period. Get used to it. We already have. And if things continue, we will again. And eventually, it will, for this church, like the denomination, things will shake out. I believe God's in control, and I think God can guide people to a just resolution, even if they disagree.
I think the media and shock issues,
Oh, yeah.
just like Sister Pentecost that you're
Mm.
talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, to take the name Sister Pentecost, that's a horrible thing. And then at Duke University the other day, you know, horrible thing that the students were praying to and all that. It's just shock.
Yeah, people have done that a long time. The thing here,
That kind of thing starts and there's no stopping.
yeah,
And it's kind of like cancer, you have to take it out, or you have to do something with it.
yeah, you do need to exercise the cancer, but you got to know what kind of cancer you're exercising too. I go back. There's a story I'll tell you real quick before we stop. When I was at Ole Miss, there was a black cheerleader who decided that he wouldn't wave a rebel flag. Well, the rebel flag was never an official symbol of the university, but the cheerleaders, by tradition, waved it, and he said he wouldn't. I understand that. What bothered me wouldn't bother him, and vice versa. But it became a sort of a controversy on campus, and there was a lot of debate about it. One night, about 15 brothers of a fraternity had a little bit too much to drink, and they decided that they were going to march on the chancellor's house. And so here's 15 of them, kind of drunk, really not even sure where they were going, marching toward the chancellor of the university's house. They got stopped by the campus police and sent home. There was no problem. The very next night on the news, national news, there was a riot marching toward the chancellor's house to burn him out, that was stopped by the National Guard, and the airplanes had to be brought in, and but that's what it looked like. It didn't happen. So yeah, I pay no attention to news media. They,
Teresa's detailing that night.
I don't trust any of the news media. They're all out for sensationalism, whatever will attract and sell. So that's the last place I'd look for truth.
But I
So
do think that Sister Pentecost is just a candidate.
I don't know. I can keep up with it.
Yeah, she's,
so
whatever, I don't know. It's a man that dresses like a woman.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the writing. You mentioned the writing about God is nothing. I don't know the context. There are contexts when I can say the same thing. God is no thing. God is no thing.
If you watch him say this thing,
Now, I don't want to watch him.
well, I have to know what the word is.
Yeah, I don't want to watch him. I'm not in battle against him. I am not. I don't care what he does. I'm going to do what I want to do. Others?
For me, it's part of my warfare.
I understand.
Because we are in agreement.
All right, any others? Okay, now, here's the thing. I had been asked, we didn't have time tonight, I've been asked by several people to talk about what's going on in Israel and the war and all, kind of give my perspective on that. I'll be happy to do that next week. Do y'all want to eat and do some stew, or do y'all just want to meet and study, those of you who are interested in the question? Okay. Eat. We'll fix something. We'll get word out. Yeah, we can do that. Maybe we'll take care of it. All right. Next week will definitely be our last one for the fall. Okay? All right.